He was just my massage therapist until he asked me. One question today. I have a story that started out completely ordinary, until one unexpected question changed everything. I had seen him a few times. My massage therapist, kind, professional, quiet. I never thought twice about our sessions. But that day, something was different. The room was calm, the music soft, and then, right in the middle of that silence, he asked me a question that made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't loud, but it was personal and deeply disarming. From that moment on, the energy shifted. I didn't know whether to be flattered, afraid, or both. What happened next still lingers in the back of my mind. Stay with me, because this story is not what you think, and it might just leave you questioning everything about trust, timing, and unspoken connection. I never thought a simple massage would change my life. For months, he was just the quiet professional therapist who helped me relax after long, exhausting days. But that night, something shifted. Something in the way he looked at me as his hands worked through the tension in my shoulders. Then he asked me one question that sent a shockwave through my entire body. How long has it been since you really let yourself feel? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. It had become a routine, a part of my life. I didn't think twice about. Every Thursday evening after work, I would make my way to the small, cozy wellness center tucked away on a quiet street. I'd sign in, greet the receptionist with a smile, and wait. In just a few minutes, I'd be led to the same room with its dim lighting and soft music playing in the background, waiting for the same hands that had become so familiar to me. His name was Eric, and for months he had been my massage therapist. At first, I'd been skeptical, unsure of whether I could trust a stranger with something as personal as my body. But after a few sessions, I realized I had no reason to worry. Eric was professional, calm, and deeply focused. He always knew just how much pressure to apply, where the tension in my body built up, and how to slowly release it. His hands were skilled, practiced, and efficient, nothing more, nothing less. It was a therapeutic exchange, nothing more than a means to unwind from the stresses of a busy life. I didn't know much about him outside of his profession. His eyes were kind but distant, as if he was used to people being in his personal space. Yet he maintained a certain distance, emotionally at least. Our conversations were polite, brief, focused on small talk about the weather or my work life. There was no flirtation, no hints of anything more. He was simply doing his job, and I was grateful for it. But over time, I began to notice the way his touch lingered just a little longer on certain spots, the way his hands worked through the knots in my muscles, but also seemed to pause as if he were waiting for something. It could have been my imagination, but I started to feel a strange shift in the air whenever he touched me. A quiet tension, a kind of unspoken energy that hovered between us. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just the physical nature of the work, a professional touch that didn't mean anything more than that. Then that Thursday evening, everything changed. I had been having a particularly difficult week, one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong, where stress and anxiety gnawed at me like a constant buzz in the background of my thoughts. I had been looking forward to this massage more than usual, hoping it would be the release I needed. When I walked in, Eric was waiting as usual, his calm demeanor offering me a sense of comfort. "Ready to get started?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. I nodded, slipping out of my clothes and into the warm sheets, the familiar scent of lavender and eucalyptus filling the air. As he began working, I could feel the tension in my muscles slowly melting away. His hands were steady and firm, his movements practiced. But today, something felt different. The rhythm of his touch seemed to slow, as though he was in no hurry to finish. His hands explored my back with more care than usual, moving gently, lingering at the spots where the tension was most stubborn. "Long day?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence in the room. It was the first time in a while that we'd had any meaningful conversation during a session. "Yeah," I sighed, closing my eyes and letting the warmth of the room wash over me. "Just one of those weeks. I'm glad I could make it here. It's the only time I really get to relax." He didn't respond immediately, and I could feel him working on a particularly tight spot near my shoulders. It was almost like he was studying me, trying to understand what was going on beneath the surface. There was something almost too intimate about the way he was touching me today, but I couldn't quite place it. Sometimes he said softly, "We carry more than just physical tension. We hold on to a lot of emotional stuff too. Things we don't even realize we're carrying." I was a little taken aback by the comment. It wasn't something I expected from a massage therapist. This kind of deep, almost philosophical insight. I opened my eyes, glancing over my shoulder at him, but his gaze was focused on the work he was doing. His fingers continued their steady movements, but I could feel a subtle shift in his presence. It was as if he had broken through a barrier I didn't even realize was there. "I guess we all have baggage," I replied, unsure of how to respond to such a personal remark. I wasn't used to talking about my emotions, let alone with someone I hardly knew. He paused for a moment, his hands still on my back. The silence stretched out, and for the first time I felt a real connection, a moment of vulnerability hanging between us. I didn't know why, but I felt the need to fill the space to explain myself, to open up in a way I hadn't done in years. "I've been so focused on everyone else lately," I confessed. My voice softer now. "Work, family, responsibilities. I haven't had time for myself, and I don't even remember the last time I felt at peace, like truly at peace." Eric's hands moved to my neck, applying just the right amount of pressure, and I couldn't help but release a soft sigh. He seemed to understand, as though he could sense the weight of the words I hadn't spoken. "Sometimes we forget how to let ourselves feel," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We're so busy holding it together for everyone else that we forget what it's like to just be." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, I closed my eyes again, letting the feeling of his touch wash over me. And just when I thought I couldn't take this intimacy any further, he asked the question that would change everything. "How long has it been since you really let yourself feel?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a casual inquiry, it was an invitation to something deeper, to something I hadn't even realized I needed to face. The question hung in the air like an electric current, crackling softly but unmistakably. It was simple, yet it had a weight that I couldn't ignore. My breath caught in my throat for a moment, and my body tensed in response, unsure of how to process the vulnerability he had just offered. Eric's voice had been calm, but there was an edge to it now, an edge that seemed to cut through the layers of distance I'd kept between us. All this time, I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the warmth of the room suddenly too much to bear. His touch on my neck, which had been so soothing just moments ago, now felt almost too intimate, too personal. It was as if he had unlocked something deep within me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. My eyes fluttered open, and I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him. His expression was soft, but there was something else there, something more than just the professional demeanor he had always maintained. It was almost like understanding. He wasn't looking at me the way he always did before a therapist, offering a service detached but attentive. Now there was something deeper in his gaze, something that seemed to reach right through me. For the first time, I felt as though he could see beyond the surface. He could see into me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. "I don't know," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. The admission felt like I was opening a door to something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge in years. I've been so caught up in everything. I don't know if I remember what it's like to just be, to feel, without thinking, without holding back. Eric's hands moved gently over my shoulders, his touch now tender, almost reverent. His fingers worked their way down my spine with a calm precision. But there was an unmistakable tenderness in the way he touched me, as if he were honoring something fragile inside me. The quiet, steady pressure he applied seemed to release more than just the knots in my muscles. It was as though he was unlocking parts of me I hadn't even realized I was holding on to. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with the weight of unspoken words. I could feel the tension building between us, a connection that was no longer just physical. It was something more, something deeper that had begun to emerge with each touch, each glance. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. My body was responding to him in ways I couldn't control, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. His hands were working their magic, but it wasn't just the physical release I felt, it was something emotional, something buried deep within me being coaxed out by his gentle touch. Do you ever let yourself feel beyond the surface? Eric's voice was soft again, like a murmur, but there was something compelling in the way he spoke. It was as if he wasn't just asking about my body anymore. He was asking about everything I had tucked away, about the fears, the desires, the parts of me I had hidden for so long, I didn't know how to respond. My mind was a blur, a tangled mess of emotions that I couldn't untangle. But in that moment, I realized something. I had been so afraid of feeling, so afraid of opening myself up to anything beyond the surface, afraid of what might happen if I let go, afraid of what I might discover about myself. But as his hands continued to move slowly, purposefully, something in me began to unravel. The tension in my body was melting away, but it was more than just the physical relief. It was as though his touch was pulling something out of me, something I had kept locked away, a need, a yearning, something that had been buried beneath the weight of responsibilities and obligations. The room felt smaller now, the air between us charged with an undeniable energy. I turned my head slightly, catching his gaze again. His eyes were dark, intense, and for the first time I saw something in them that wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was an invitation, a challenge, a question without words. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't deny the way my body responded to him. The connection was undeniable, something more than just physical touch. It was emotional, intimate, and raw. His presence was like a magnet pulling me closer, making it impossible to deny the chemistry that had been building beneath the surface for so long. I could feel my pulse quicken as he leaned in closer. His breath, warm against my ear. "It's okay," he murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to hold back. You don't have to be afraid of feeling." And in that moment, everything shifted. The walls I had built around myself, the barriers I had carefully erected to protect myself from vulnerability began to crumble. I wasn't sure where the boundaries of our professional relationship ended and where something more began, but in that instant, it didn't matter. I felt the heat rise in my chest again, a warmth that spread through me, igniting something deep inside. My body was responding to him in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I realized with a surprising sense of clarity that I was finally ready to let go, to feel, to be open to what was unfolding between us. His hands paused for a moment, his fingers lingering just above the curve of my back. The air between us felt electric, charged with anticipation, with something more than I had ever imagined. And then he asked it the question that would change everything. "Are you ready to feel?" It wasn't just a question about the massage anymore, it was about everything. About me, about us, about what was happening in this moment. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew the answer. I was ready. I had been ready for a long time, though I hadn't known it until now. The air between us thickened, charged with something that neither of us could quite name yet. But both of us could feel with undeniable intensity. My heart was racing, a steady drumbeat in my chest, and my mind felt like it was in a haze, overwhelmed by the mix of emotions flooding through me. I had always prided myself on being in control of my feelings, my boundaries, but now as I sat there vulnerable in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years, I realized that control had slipped from my hands. His hand moved again, a gentle, deliberate touch, this time lower on my back, tracing the curve of my spine. The sensation sent a shiver through me, and I couldn't suppress the soft intake of breath that escaped my lips. Every part of me wanted to retreat, to pull back into the safe, familiar space I had built around myself, but something inside me, something I hadn't known existed, pushed me forward. I wanted this. I wanted to feel, to be seen, to allow someone else to see me in this raw, unguarded state. Eric's touch was like a whisper against my skin, not forceful or demanding, but coaxing, like he was encouraging me to let go of the tightly wound knots within me. But his hands weren't just physically releasing the tension in my muscles, they were reaching something deeper, something that had been buried in me for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. My body was responding to him, every fiber of my being pulling toward him as though he had unlocked something I didn't even realize I was holding on to. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate deep inside me. "It's okay to let go, it's okay to feel what you've been holding back." The words washed over me like a balm, soothing the fears that had begun to stir in my chest. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. The way his voice felt like a warm embrace. I felt like he was reaching out, trying to pull me closer, but not in an invasive way. No, it was like he was waiting for me to decide, for me to make the choice. I closed my eyes, allowing the sensations to wash over me, feeling my breath steady as I sank further into the moment. His hands moved to the back of my neck again, fingers gently pressing into the tension that had gathered there, easing it away bit by bit. My pulse raced again, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with anticipation, with the weight of everything unspoken, everything unsaid that had been simmering just beneath the surface for far too long. For a moment, I forgot who we were, forgot the boundaries of our roles, the reason he was here. It was as though time stood still and all that existed was the connection between us, the quiet rhythm of his touch, the slow dance of energy that seemed to pull us closer, even though we hadn't moved an inch. His hands slid down, brushing against the curve of my shoulder blades, his fingers pausing just for a moment, as though he too was giving me the space to decide how far I was willing to go. I felt the weight of his presence like a force, but it wasn't overpowering. It was grounding, comforting, and something inside me finally allowed myself to breathe freely. The vulnerability that had threatened to overwhelm me earlier now felt like a gift, a release. It was as though I was shedding layers of fear, of hesitation, of doubts. I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. Eric wasn't pushing me. He was simply holding space for me to breathe, to exist, to be real in ways I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. "You're not alone," he said, his words breaking through the haze of my thoughts. His voice was still calm, steady, but I could hear something else in it now, something deeper, more intimate. "I'm here, and you can trust me." His words hit me in a place I wasn't prepared for. They reached deep into me, tugging at the parts of me I had kept hidden for so long. I had spent so much time building walls around my heart, convinced that I couldn't trust anyone. But here, in the quiet of this moment, with his touch so gentle, so reassuring, I was starting to believe him. My chest tightened and I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears threatened to spill from my eyes, a mix of relief, frustration, and a longing I hadn't known I had been suppressing. This wasn't just physical anymore. It wasn't just about the massage. It was about something bigger, something I hadn't been ready to confront until now. Eric's hands moved again, this time, more slowly, as if sensing the shift in me. He continued to apply steady pressure to the knots in my muscles, but his touch had changed. It was no longer just professional. It was deeply personal, grounding me in this shared space. In this shared moment between us, I felt something break inside of me, something I hadn't even realized was holding me back. It wasn't just the physical tension anymore, it was the emotional walls I had built around myself, the ones I had convinced myself I needed. But now, in this moment, I didn't want to hide anymore. I didn't want to retreat into the shell I had constructed. I wanted to be seen, to be understood, and I wanted to allow someone else. In Eric's fingers brushed against the back of my ear, the touch so delicate it almost felt like a whisper. He was still working on the muscles in my neck, but the energy in the room had shifted. What had begun as a routine massage had transformed into something so much more intimate, so much more connected. The tension that had built up between us earlier wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional. It was a recognition of everything unspoken, everything I had kept buried. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to let go. I wasn't afraid to feel. As the last traces of tension melted from my muscles, I became aware of the deep stillness between us. The air no longer felt thick with uncertainty, but instead it was serene, almost sacred. I was no longer just a woman in a vulnerable state seeking healing. I was someone who had allowed herself to feel, to be open, and to trust. Eric's hands rested gently on my shoulders, his touch still warm, but now with a sense of finality. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was filled with understanding, a shared moment that neither of us had expected, but that had changed everything. I think I've never felt more at peace. I whispered, my voice soft, barely audible. It was true. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to guard myself to maintain the walls I had so carefully built. In this simple, unspoken exchange, I had found a new kind of strength, one that didn't rely on control but on surrender. Eric gave a small smile, his eyes meeting mine with a warmth that resonated deeply. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his words grounding me even further. As I sat there, my body and mind in perfect harmony, I realized that the healing I had been searching for wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was the gift of allowing someone in, of letting myself be seen. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That question, so simple, so unexpected, still echoes in my mind. I walked into that appointment expecting nothing more than an hour of relaxation, but I left with something else entirely: confusion, curiosity, and a part of myself reawakened. It wasn't about the words alone, it was the way he asked, the timing, the look in his eyes. And maybe that's what scared me most. Some will say it was harmless. Others will say a professional line was crossed. But in that quiet room, under soft lighting and calm music, it felt personal, real. So now I ask you, was it inappropriate or was it simply human? Two people connecting in a moment neither of them expected. Would you have welcomed the question or walked away the moment it left his lips? Tell me what you think in the comments. I'm ready for honesty, even if it stings. Follow me so I have more motivation to create more thought-provoking stories like this, or simply encourage me by pressing number 1. Your support truly fuels what I do.